Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Rose City Politics. It is May 26th. Our regular panel tonight includes Doug Sartori coming from, oh no, Doug, where are you coming from?
I'm coming from June 12th, 1987. Ronald Reagan famously asking Mr. Gorbachev to tear down this wall. I thought it was appropriate given our topic tonight.
I like it. That's pretty good. I like you always lean in more historical when the opportunity is there and far more pop culture. That's actually one where you were able to blend the two together. So kudos to you on that one. I'm here as well, John Lidke. Thank you for joining us. I'm coming to you live in front of, I don't know, you might remember it. It was the Amazon bid. It featured a gondola revisal. We had that presented back in 2003, 2004. I think the gondola is still sitting at Science City. So if anyone wants to get the revival going, the opportunity is there still.
Wait, is that actually the gondola that they were going to use?
Yeah, take a look.
Oh man.
It didn't, to be fair, I put Amazon on it. It did say Science City or something.
I'm sorry, and I know we're going to get to Melinda, but that gondola that's at Science City, is it locked?
Yeah, the doors have been fused.
Okay, all right.
I mean, I don't know. I presume they're fused. I would hope, for the sake of, we can all presume why. Otherwise, it's like a phone booth that need not exist anymore. Like bad things probably have happened. Well, gondolas aside, we have a guest tonight joining us on the panel, Melinda Munro from Munro Strategic Perspectives, providing government, not-for-profits, a look to, strategic perspectives, I suppose is the best way to put the first business there. And you've got a new collective that you've launched that you mentioned, Kindness, Justice, and Inclusion Collective. You're doing diversity, equity, and anti-racism advising for municipal governments. Melinda, thank you for joining us tonight.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Where are you coming from tonight?
Well, so yes, in honor of one of our topics tonight, I thought I'd come from Canada's hottest of all possible hotspots, postal code L6P, up there in Brampton, Ontario.
You didn't go for the joke with the background, but I think that the background does speak for itself. So that's fair. There's nothing wrong with it. Thank you for joining us. We've got some great topics to get to. We're glad to have you here. If you're listening right now and you're a Patreon subscriber, thank you so much. You make this show possible. If you're not, you're freeloading. Get over to patreon.com/Rose City Politics. Become a Patreon subscriber. If you're just listening, we love you too. We love the Patreon subscribers just a little bit more. Contractually, that's what you have to say when you have a Patreon. It's there in the fine print. It's for both parties' benefit. We also appear in print monthly and online at bizxmagazine.com. And we are on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, all of your favorite podcasting apps. And we, of course, broadcast live every week, and that is possible due to the kind support of Liuna 625, Building Better Communities. As I said tonight, we have a big show. We're going to be talking about cross-border vaccination, a potential Transit Windsor and Amherstburg link-up, bringing the past closer to the present, 2 safe consumption sites identified in the downtown core by the health unit, and municipal information requests and how timing, varies widely depending on which municipality in the region you are reaching out to. But let's get to our big topic tonight. We've been following this one now for a couple of weeks. The story, it's the story that keeps on giving. We're not talking about Chris Vanderdolen this time. Mayor Dilkens is fielding ideas for cross-border vaccines, in this case using bridges, tunnels, and even boats. Windsor Star's Brian Cross put this one out. Mayor Dilkens says that U.S. COVID-19 vaccines are being wasted in Detroit, and he is still logistically seeking ways for Windsorites to cross the border or get close to it for vaccinations from Detroit pharmacists, despite an unwillingness continually from the U.S. federal government to allow it, and an unwillingness from the Canadian government to allow quarantine exemptions for it. The mayor has brought forward 4 ideas The first one, setting up a vaccine clinic at the foot of the Ambassador Bridge so Windsorites could travel across and get a shot without having to cross U.S. customs. Of course, they would still have to cross the U.S. border. The second idea is to close the tunnel and run buses to the Detroit side so Windsorites could get their shots without crossing U.S. customs. But of course, they'd still need to cross the U.S. border. The other idea is to run shuttles to the middle of the tunnel where a U.S. pharmacist could administer a U.S. vaccine across the international border to a Canadian. Of course, the vaccine would be crossing an international border in this case, as would part of a physician who is not licensed to practice on this side of the border. And the last idea that the mayor put forward was to set up a ferry service, something that's been pushed for a long time here in the city, a ferry to vaccinate people on the river. It was not disclosed whether the U.S. pharmacist would be vaccinating from one boat to another boat, or if the pharmacist would cross onto a Canadian vessel. I mean, it sounds funny, but I mean, these are the logistical hurdles one would actually have to expect to work through. Now, Mayor Dilkens told the Windsor Star he's had conversations with U.S. officials about this, but conceded that the middle of the tunnel idea might not be the most practical, although he expected that 500 residents would show up immediately for it, causing the project to be, quote, overwhelmed, according to the mayor. Now, in a statement issued Tuesday, MP Eric Kuzmerchuk outlined that he's been working on this file for the past 5 weeks. He's been focusing on getting Windsor Essex residents to get across to Detroit, to get them across at a port of entry without entering the United States to get a vaccine, or to have the vaccine travel from a Detroit hospital to Windsor Regional Hospital. Kuzmerchuk says of the three possible approaches, it's the hospital to hospital approach that makes the most sense and has the most promise. Kuzmerchuk also says that Kuzmerchuk says that he's been working behind the scenes. Now, he doesn't say it's unlike Mayor Dilkens. I preface that myself. It's obviously very clear. We've been talking about this now for weeks. Mayor Dilkens has been bringing this issue forward. Kuzmerchuk, however, says that he didn't bring it through the news media because the U.S. first has to approve the usage of the vaccines, and second, Customs and Border Protection would have to give the okay for Canadians to cross over to their side. Now, this all really became a flutter towards the end of last week. We had multiple conservative MPs in the House rising, I think, to Michelle Rempel Garner stood up and spoke about this. Mayor Dilkens obviously has been doing the rounds, Global News, Toronto Star, Post media networks. I'm not going to say as a result of this campaign, but so it's, causation is not correlation. And vice versa. But there was a cross-border vaccination effort that was going on between North Dakota and, was it Saskatchewan, Manitoba? I'm not sure where it was. My U.S. geography is not the best. However, that has now been canceled, with U.S. Customs and Border Protection saying that essential transit is not to be provided for simply a vaccine treatment. So we have also seen locally a couple stories here, and we're going to dive into this. I'm just going through the background here. Windsorites have been subjected to quarantines because they traveled across. I'm not going to say at the advisement of the mayor, but certainly as a result of this type of conversation, thinking that the opportunity was out there. So Melinda, I'm going to bring your voice in first as the guest panelist today. It's a complex issue. It's one of those, I think, more seemingly complex issues than needs to be, because in my opinion, it's not going to happen. It's more likely that there's going to be the gondola behind me built in the next 2 weeks to do cross-border vaccinations than any of these ideas, except for less, I suppose, the hospital to hospital transfer. I know that this isn't your specific area of advisement to the municipalities that you may do. What would your advice be here? What's your take on all of this?
Well, actually, to that point, John, one of the things that, when I do give advice to municipal governments or other organizations is as we go through the lean principles. And one of the things that we know to be true most of the time is it is always more efficient to move things to people than to move people to things. So the hospital program is the one that makes most sense. Move things to people, right? Bring the vaccines to where the people are. Moving people to where the vaccines are is much harder. I mean, imagine you can move 1,000 vaccines in a box, or you can move 1,000 people in 1,000 cars. What's the more efficient thing to do, right? So we move things to people, not people to things. I have to say, when I was listening to you describe the various choices, how is that bus going to turn around? Like, is the idea that the bus goes through the tunnel and then you vaccinate the, say, well, no, because you only have to have a few, you have to have 6 feet between. So say you vaccinate like the 6 of people that are on that bus, and then it reverses back through the tunnel and then loads up again, or maybe it reverses the first one, because we're from Windsor, we always reverse into everything. We reverse into the back, and then we drive out the. Like, honest to God, who thought that was a good idea?
And that's where I made the joke in our pre-chat to Doug, which was, this is where Mayor Dilkins said it's not the most practical of ideas. It's like, okay, yes, no kidding. But he also said, I expect 500 people would sign up tomorrow. Fair. I mean, I do believe that. But he goes on to say that it would overwhelm the idea, which is probably not the best, to have a international border crossing in a poorly ventilated area during a pandemic with a large amount of people and border guards who aren't, ready to deal with this, get overwhelmed. I don't know. It just doesn't seem like the best of ideas.
No. And so really, if you think about, so there's all the health equity issues that arise, but even just thinking about the logistics, right? So how many people have to be involved in the logistics of figuring out, signing up, getting over there, making sure that they get over there, they don't go to Trader Joe's while they're there, they come back, shutting down the border for all the other important things we keep getting told we need that border open for, moving car parts, moving, auto parts manufacturing executives, moving medical professionals, and then getting them vaccinated, getting that vaccination recorded, and getting back here. That's a lot of logistics efforts. So do we, as Canadians, who already have a higher rate of first dose vaccinations in Windsor than they do in Detroit, in Wayne County, do we need to say, okay, Michigan, down tools on all your public health logistics and vaccinate us? Or do we say, no, keep your tools going and vaccinate all the people you haven't vaccinated, because your vaccination rate is lower than ours and your hotspots are higher than ours? That's the part that it's a puzzle to me, because in the end, all we do is we race to the finish line, but the finish line's in the same place as it would ever be. If we all got vaccinated with Michigan vaccines tomorrow, we still couldn't go to Detroit because it's still a hotspot, because it's still too dangerous to go there. So when I think about this, I ask myself every time, what work does this story do for the mayor? What work is it doing? I am mystified.
Well, I guess I would counter with it. Every time I see a post that he makes about it, now, mind you, I've blocked a lot of people on Facebook, so maybe I'm not seeing a certain amount of negative comments, but I guess I'll push back for the sake of devil's advocacy here. It seems like a lot of people are very happy with what he's doing. They see a mayor who is pushing strongly for something that makes sense. Now, do you think that we're talking too much inside baseball here, and maybe the mayor's office has a good strategy on it?
I think it does some work for him politically. I'm not gonna deny that, but I don't. We're not going to be any further ahead because he's doing this. So people are anxious about this pandemic, and actually, there's a really good discussion about the narrative about the pandemic. So when it started, we talked about how we were together at war against the virus. So we were together doing that, and now we're in a race, which means we're against each other. The faster I get vaccinated, the slower you get vaccinated, right? What's the joke about, I don't have to outrun you. I don't have to outrun the bear. I just have to outrun you. So I don't have to outrun COVID-19. I just have to outrun Lidkey in order to be safe. But that's completely wrong. In order for us to be safe, we all have to be vaccinated, which means the people in Detroit need the vaccines that they have. And the Michigan needs to solve its own problems. And we're solving ours. We are way ahead. I mean, look behind me. We've got Brampton, 20% positivity rate in Brampton. Why aren't we sending vaccines to them? Instead of hoarding vaccines for us down here in Windsor, which means we can do what? Visit our neighbors. We're not going to be able to go anywhere. Let's mobilize together and solve this problem together. Let's send our logistics people to Michigan to help them get themselves vaccinated.
Yeah, and just to build on that, Melinda, it's, not only is there the, the balance between the U.S. and Canada, but also we have to look more broadly. If we're going to move vaccines internationally, um, why would we be taking them from the US and moving them to a country, Canada, that has ample vaccine supply and a good plan and a rollout that is proceeding well? Would we not want to move some vaccines to a country like India that has a very low vaccination rate? Medical professionals dying because in part because there is not adequate access to a vaccine. Would that not be better for kind of global public health? Now, I get that the mayor's job is not to advocate for India, but I think you're right on, when in your points. Like, I think that the key thing that I took from your comments is, talking about anxiety and public anxiety. And to me, what Mayor Dilkens is doing here is very cynical. It is an attempt to make political capital and do political damage to opponents or perceived opponents out of the anxiety of the population around COVID. And I think that is unconscionable. And I also think it is a terrible political strategy in the long run. And Jon, you in your opener mentioned that there has been a lot of amplification from partisan conservatives. Look, I don't think that's a coincidence. I do think that this is coordinated to some extent. I think that this communications effort from the mayor is being coordinated with the Conservative Party of Canada. At least I think that there is a strong appearance of that, and every reason to think so when you see MPs like Garner, who have nothing to do with Windsor, amplifying his comments, repeatedly amplifying his comments. And when you hear the same talking points coming from members of the Conservative Party of Canada as are coming from the mayor of Windsor, I think it's fair to say that either there is something coordinated happening or it is a miraculous coincidence.
Just sort of, sorry, Jon. So I'll kind of add to this, but I think if I have to really think what the work this story is doing for the mayor, because if you think about the kind of, you talk about anxiety and the language, so that there's that why are we waiting to get vaccinated? We're behind. We're waiting. Things are being wasted. Detroit is wasting its vaccine, so we good Canadians, we can help them to prevent the waste of this life-giving miracle that we've created in the form of a vaccine. So all that's really good, language for creating that anxiety, and it works. I'm going to say what I think the reason this story does for the mayor is that he came out last week and said, you can do this. Here's the pathway to do this. So first it starts off with he did it. Then here's the pathway for you to do it. And then it turns out the people who took that pathway are in 14-day quarantine, and they're mad as hornets. And they're phoning his office, mad as hornets. And this story, the work it's doing, is trying to deflect the anger of the people who are now in quarantine from him over to Justin Trudeau, because it's easy to be mad at Justin Trudeau. He's not deflecting it over to Doug Ford. He's not deflecting it over to the American border guards. He's deflecting it to sort of the most distant possible villain, but a nice, easy villain to deflect it to. I think that's what the work is. But the question I asked back, because this is sort of a media program, what work is this story doing for the Windsor Star?
Well, we were talking about that in the again in the pre-chat. I will say really quickly before we leave that last issue, Mayor Dilkens didn't do it. For all the talk about wasting vaccine, he didn't get his vaccine while he was over there.
Well, no, yes, that's right.
And beyond that, though, while suggesting for people to do it, he crossed on the medical exemption because of his child. So like he was advocating for something that he himself had special permission to do and then didn't follow through on. And now there's people who were trying to do something they thought they were eligible for and couldn't even get across. And now they've got that punishment. Now, we talk about what's it doing for the Windsor Star. We were talking about this, that, the city beat reporters have had a lot to do for this story for the past, 8-9 days now. Multiple stories. How many, Doug? I think we've seen between, editorial and reporting, at least 4, maybe 5. at least at the Star itself. And then, of course, there's the other outlets in the city. We've seen a spattering of stories about this issue as well. Not as many as the Star, of course. And then we've seen the trail upward through the Post Media Network and then expanded through the other nationals once it got up there. Doug, I'll let you talk about this because it was what you brought forward, but it really sat with me for a good 24 hours. You asked, and it's the same question there that Melinda asked, what do you think that these city reporters might be able to do if they weren't focusing on this for as long as they have been? That made you hit me like a brick wall with that one.
Yeah, I think that, and I think we should probably mention that we did reach out to both Brian Cross and Dan Jarvis to appear on the show tonight. Neither were able to because of previous commitments, which is fair enough, but we did want to include them in the conversation. So having said that, I think I think it's really important as a journalist to look at what you're doing with a story and try to understand, what is being done by the actors who are talking to you and influencing you. And there is definitely some reciprocity in any relationship between a journalist and a source. There's a source who wants to get some particular message out. The journalist wants to tell a story. They think that this, there's some public interest to the story. But I'm not sure that the sustained attention on this issue kind of meets the test of reciprocity there. Like, I don't think that if you're the Windsor Star, I don't think that you can look back at the multiple columns and articles on this issue and say this is a valuable public service. And while we're talking about it, I want to remind everyone, and maybe folks want to go back to January 8th, 2021, article by Ann Jarvis titled "Despite Wall of Cases, Personality Conflicts, Egos, and Turf Protection." And the thrust of that piece was about the allegations being made by members of the committee, the strategic military planner who was part of the committee, and also David Mouget and Mayor Dilkins was in this story as well, talking about how there wasn't a plan for vaccination, how worried they were that there wasn't a plan, that the rollout of the vaccines was going to be a disaster, cats and dogs were going to end up living together, everything was going to be terrible. And how has that actually played out? In that piece, Dr. Ahmed had, I thought, some pretty good and pointed comments. He to the extent that he said this isn't leadership about folks who were pushing on this, which I thought was pretty pointed for a public servant. We're in the middle of a pandemic. This is quoting from the piece. Is it important that we should talk about how do we vaccinate in April versus you have 3 hospitals in outbreak? You have your healthcare system right now on the verge of collapsing. I am sorry. This is just a distraction. And, I think that comment can be applied to a lot of what is happening here. This whole saga is not doing anything to, illuminate opportunities or possibilities for the public. Even if we got this thing up and running, it would be a sideshow. So let's say that Mayor Dilkins is right, and 500 people a day would show up and to be vaccinated in the middle of the bridge. Windsor Essex is, I checked a week ago Sunday, and we vaccinated 4,200 people that day. So, we're vaccinating thousands of people a day. And also there are many, many, many slots to receive vaccinations that are going unfilled in Windsor. So we have more supply of vaccines than people are willing to take up. Like, we have an oversupply of vaccines, at least if you consider the fact that there are appointments and vaccination slots going unused. If you consider that to be an indicator that we have an oversupply of vaccines. So
we're starting to offer second doses this week.
Yeah, so exactly. So if 500 people a day we're getting, we're, backing up through the tunnel in a bus, as Melinda suggested, it would be an increase of 10%.
Right.
So is the mayor's primary focus, the main thrust of his public communication, multiple editorials, 2 editorials in one day last week, multiple news stories, is all of that sound and fury? If we were able to increase the vaccination rate by 10%, would that be worth it?
Well,
that's where, oh, sorry, Joanne.
The mayor was suggesting that if we get that vaccination rate up, that's when we'll be able to open the border. He tied it directly one to the other. So then the further question is, okay, great. So what are we going to create a new border at Chatham, Kent? So as to not allow any other Canadians to make it into our area to go across? Like, it doesn't,
nobody from Brampton gets to go.
So yeah, I didn't mean to step on your toes there, but it's one of those things where it's a really easy, cheap political shot. The federal government won't allow it. Why won't they allow something so simple? Until you start to break down, well, it's not simple. There's a lot of issues with it. You're going to complicate more issues. What are we actually gaining from it? But I suppose the flip side to it is we sound like the evil ones here because we don't want people to get their vaccines. So is it a strategic play here? Like, is he, you think he's running for higher office here? Is this some kind of an opening gamut? Like, I'm trying to figure out what is the end game here other than, I guess, this Fox News cycle of, just, lower your own intellect to hope that the viewers have the same lower level of intellect.
I'm going to go back to what I said. I think the work it does for him is that he is embarrassed that he put out this idea that there was a way of doing this and people got, hosed by it, to use a Canadian term, right? They wound up in quarantine. We don't know how many are in quarantine. We just know that at least a few families are in quarantine based on the news stories. And so I think he's trying to, humiliation is a really important driver of people's weird behavior. So I think that's one of the 2 things that this story is doing for him. Maybe it's also about higher office, but see the alternative story, and I get a point to this Brampton thing behind me again. The alternative story that the Star could be covering is, where are Windsor's hotspots? Who are the people in Windsor who are not getting vaccinated? Where are the vaccine hesitancy issues at? What are we doing about people who are newcomers, who are students who are working in cleaning, grocery stores and Costco's? Are they getting vaccinated? Who are those people that are turning down the vaccine appointments? Where's the investigative journalism that says, okay, what's our postal code that needs the most help? And if the mayor wants to say, okay, let's take that postal code and get them across the border, maybe there's some justification, although I still think that's not the right way to do it. But the story about how badly we're being treated by the feds is distracting us from the story of where are there issues in this community about health equity and access to vaccines, and are we pursuing them?
I think that's a really interesting point that you brought up there. If he was advocating for the specific hotspots to, be brought across for it, that would be a very strong equity piece. I suppose if you look at the whole idea, there is an opportunity here for a slam dunk in terms of, public perception. But just the way that it's been presented is certainly not the way that it's coming across. And I suppose if you're looking to see what those hotspots are, you could invite Karina Lua. We could bring her back on the show. She put together an app about this. And I was just trying to look up there. I wasn't able to pull it up quick enough. She recently released some updates, though, about where those hotspots are. Doug, do you have any last thoughts on this topic?
I did want to just touch on the question of, whether Mayor Dilkens is seeking to run for higher office. And I'm not sure that that's his primary motivation, but I do think that this story is going to make a lot more sense. And all of this narrative coming out of the mayor's office is probably going to make a lot more sense in 6 months' time and maybe in 12 months' time. We're going to have a federal election and a provincial election before the next municipal election. And I don't know if the mayor's name will be on one of those ballots, but perhaps a close ally's name will be on one of those ballots. And maybe this will all make a lot more sense then.
Don't put anything past silly season. That's what I've come to learn when it gets to elections. And we have 2 elections coming up. So look at that. Melinda, do you have any last thoughts on this before we move on?
No, no, I'm good. I think we've kind of, hopefully, like I feel like we've beaten this story to death. I hope the Star starts to feel like they've beaten it to death.
Yeah, well, we'll find out. We'll see. Maybe they'll release a editorial about it. Hard to say. Let's keep going around though with a story here about Transit Windsor service looking to potentially move into Amherstburg. That's called a segue. Brian Cross put this one out as well. In coming weeks, Transit Windsor is going to be seeking City Council approval to start negotiating a transit service and maintenance agreement with Amherstburg, which could see Amherstburg linked to Windsor via bus transit for the first time since 1977, folks. In 2017, Transit Windsor, of course, expanded its route to LaSalle. Now, the Sandwich, Windsor, and Amherstburg Railway began in the 1880s as a streetcar service. Of course, we've been speaking about that for a while now with a celestial beacon and a streetcar. That evolved into the municipal bus transit system that we know of as Transit Windsor. That was 1977. They dropped their service to Amherstburg, however, in the 1970s as well. Now, this new plan, if it goes forward on a cost recovery basis, wouldn't cost Windsorites any money whatsoever. Of course, people in Amherstburg would pay a fare, and they'd be entitled to travel routes throughout Amherstburg and northward through LaSalle to Windsor, allowing for transfers along the way at no extra cost. Transit Windsor is intent on creating a more regional system because, of course, adding other municipalities helps to spread capital costs while increasing new routes. Transit Windsor currently operates a commuter route linking St. Clair College to Essex, Kingsville, and Leamington. Now, Transit Windsor's new executive director, Tyson Craig, told the Windsor Star he expects that the service could start next year if approved, and he'd like to see Transit Windsor expanded into Tecumseh and Lakeshore as well. Amherstburg's Mayor Aldo DiCarlo said public consultations and a proposed route have already been conducted, with a vision of a new route along County Road 20 in the riverfront, entering town, doing a loop covering the urban area before returning to Windsor with at least one transfer point in LaSalle. You know, it's another one of these stories, and I'll come to you, Melinda, first as a panelist. I mean, you look at something like even just talk of regionalization or, dare you say the A word, amalgamation here. And I don't think that's necessarily where we're going. But regionalization was something that, I remember being 15, 20 years ago when I was younger, just a young one at like 10, 11, there were lots of conversations about it, and it would never have happened. You can't get people linked together. But we're seeing more and more of these linkages. Of course, this being expanded through Transit Windsor, having already expanded to LaSalle with their educational links. You see, with Windsor Police, with the Amherstburg detachment, we have you could even argue with the WFCU Center being in Tecumseh. Drum hit? No, man, we need to get the drum hit button going. Thank you. I'm always heartened to see this type of regionalization going here, or regionalism. I mean, it's a shame. It's a crying shame that people can't get around, can't get to work, can't take jobs, can't get to school because the opportunities aren't there. I saw you nodding your head right off the bat, Melinda, and I just started talking about the topic. So I'm going to presume that you're not offside from this one. What's your take on it just right off the bat?
Oh my God, creeping regionalization. No. This is, I mean, it's interesting. So speaking historically, when I used to work at the City of Windsor, this topic would come up back in sort of the mid 2000s, and it was always like, no way, this is never happening. We've tried it a million times, and actually, and it was treated as a kind of creeping regionalization. And you both might recall when Lakeshore wanted Windsor to have transit go out there, and Tecumseh basically said, we're going to block the road so that you can't have those evil Transit Windsor buses coming through our town to get to Lakeshore. And then Tecumseh decided they wanted some transit, and so then they have their own transit, and there was a big thing about whether you could transfer from a Transit Windsor bus to a Tecumseh bus, and could the Tecumseh buses come into Windsor. And the Municipal Act has all these rules about taxis and buses and things, and it was all this big harangue. Now we see the county actually saying we want it. And I wonder if one of the drivers of that is that both Amherstburg and Leamington had community service agencies who were providing a van service for students. So you could get a van from Leamington for $20 a ride or whatever to get to St. Clair College and back. And the same from Amherstburg. And that those community services demonstrated that there was a true need. So, and so, is it creeping regionalization, or have they finally realized that in fact, like much like we think Detroit is where everything is, they think Windsor is where everything is. I don't know. But I'm excited about it. Only I say this because, coming here from the West Coast, I think how, I used to be able to put my bike on the bus in Vancouver and then take it on the ferry all the way down and on the ferry over to Vancouver Island and then ride my bike around Vancouver Island. So imagine I can put my bike on the bus in downtown Windsor and I can go to Amherstburg and I can ride around some wineries and then I can put my bike back on the bus and come home. And how much fun is that going to be? Like, I think it's fantastic.
The opportunities are huge. I mean, I have friends who would say, well, Melinda, you just ride your bike from Windsor to Amherstburg. Now,
well, I do that too.
Yeah, well, good for you. That's great. I don't do that kind of thing. My friends, they do it. They also spend 6 to 8 hours and make a whole day of it and picnic along the way. And, that's great and it's lovely. But I think, the opportunities for people to be able to use the trail networks that we have. Yeah, absolutely huge. The opportunities for people, again, as I said, I've had friends that weren't able to go to school for certain periods because it wasn't economically viable at the time, just because of the distance, the time that was involved. For whatever reason, it's difficult to get from place A to B when, transit isn't the most convenient. The same thing goes for work opportunities. But how great would it be if someone wanted to be able to spend the day, as you said, not necessarily just riding a bike, but go to Amherstburg and, walk around, take part in the region that we have. As much as we like to try to say we are the automotive capital of Canada, and while we are, a lot of people still don't have cars, and that number is increasing. And I think, seeing services like Bird, as we've talked about, with 650 new electric vehicles on the roads in the coming months, you're going to see more and more people out thinking differently. Doug, I know that you're going to play contrarian here since Don's not here. Why is this a terrible idea, and tear it down?
No, I'm sorry to disappoint you. Obviously the all the good things that you guys talked about are there. I think also there is a really important component here. Workforce Windsor Essex did a study a few years ago about where the jobs were and where the people were, and it is really, really important for economic opportunities to have good transit links between municipalities, because jobs don't all live in one municipality in Windsor Essex. So this is going to facilitate the movement of students, the movement of labor, as well as the pleasure trips that Melinda was talking about. I think there's a lot of good stuff here. But what is interesting to me, I wanted to dig into some details and maybe spitball a little bit about this, building on this article. What's interesting to me is how it will be governed and how it will be paid for. So the service will be offered on a cost recovery basis, says the article. That can't be purely out of fares, because we subsidize fares in Windsor. The fares don't pay the costs of Windsor Transit. So municipalities outside of Windsor will have to be coughing up some amount of money to subsidize the routes and to subsidize the service itself.
So I will clarify that is I wrote that as simply cost recovery basis for specifically Windsor taxpayers. So yeah, I did not mean to omit what you're suggesting there. Yeah, I agree with you for sure.
Yeah, so I think that's a really important piece. When Amherstburg entered into a contract with Windsor Police to extend police service to Amherstburg for Windsor Police, they controversially got a seat on the governing body, on the Windsor Police Board. So how is this going to work with Windsor Transit? Are we going to, and I think Windsor Transit doesn't have a board. It has an advisory board, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think it has a governing board. Melinda, you probably know.
I think it does have a governing board. It's because it's a little bit of a weird anomaly that it's a federally regulated corporation. because of its cross-border element. So it is a private corporation. It has a board. Now, it may be that they've switched that board to be the city council. It didn't used to be, but it could be that the board is now city council. I don't know, but it does have an independent board.
So when I was on it, it was board of directors was comprised of 2 councillors, 3 members from the community, and then I was there as a non-voting member of the Mayor's Youth Advisory Committee.
Okay, so either way, either by city council or by a board, and maybe when one of you folks is talking, I'll go and clarify that. But either way, there are decisions made about the governance, about the strategic direction, about capital spending that are made by whichever body governs Transit Windsor. Will county municipalities purely be purchasing a service and not have any ability to influence those decisions? So, when it comes time to upgrade the fleet and we're deciding what type of bus we're going to purchase, will that, will county municipalities have a say? And I guess where I'm going with this is when, I do think it's a good thing. I'm glad we're doing it. I'm glad these negotiations are happening. I think it'll be a benefit to citizens of, residents of the city and other municipalities. But is this an instance where if we're going to have regional transit, we actually should have regional transit governance?
Probably, but you're right. It's not at the expense of public members of the advisory panel. And I think that's what you're talking about with respect to the police board, was that the police board took one of the seats that should be held by a true member of the public, and they gave it to an Amherstburg councillor in order to, give Amherstburg some participation, rather than consider ways that they could alter the police board structure. So I think that, so you're right. I looked it up. Transit Windsor does have an advisory committee, which is, but it also is required to have a board of directors because it is a private corporation. And so they, somewhere in the background, probably city council sits as the board of directors, and then this advisory committee advises city council about what they want. And that advisory committee contains a number of members of the public. And that's really important because you have users, all the issues that happened last year around the shutdown of transit. And the decision of the mayor to shut down transit, the advisory committee, one hopes, would have said, here are the impacts that are going to be on the ridership of making a decision like that. And now that we're expanding to the county, one hopes that the advisory committee from the county members could explain the same thing. If you shut down transit, then there are people, at least if you live in Windsor, there's the possibility you could walk or drive your scooter from one side of the city to the other in a reasonable amount of time. But there's no way you're getting from Leamington or Kingsville into the city to your job if their transit buses are not running.
So if you're a resident of Amherstburg and you have an issue or you would like to see a change in transit service, and you complain to Councillor Simone or Councillor Prue or Councillor McDonald, they have actually no ability between contract negotiations to have any say about that service. So, I'm not saying that we should not do this because of that, but I think it's a really interesting feature of the way that we're going about sort of gradually regionalizing services in Windsor, Essex, that we're ending up with a patchwork of governance, and none of it makes a lot of sense when you step back and take a 1,000-foot view.
And also the cost profile. So you mentioned that previously, was that, so we already subsidize transit riders in Windsor. We subsidize the people on Transit Windsor itself quite a bit, and we subsidize people who use accessible transit even more. So if you are running a transit service, you are required by law to also run an accessible transit service. So there will have to be some accommodation made that if we're running transit into Amherstburg, that there's an accessible version of that. You don't just have to get on a regular bus if you can't. The cost of the subsidy for riders from Amherstburg, given the volume of riders we would anticipate, is going to be quite high. And now, if the county were able to distribute those subsidy costs across all 7 municipalities or the county as a whole, then it would actually be it might be quite reasonable. But if we're saying, well, Amherstburg is going to have to subsidize Amherstburg riders, and Kingsville riders, and Leamington riders, it's a disincentive to want to expand the availability of transit.
Yeah, We'll see how it
Did
all
we-
works out.
Did
I
John-
just got hit by a brick wall there.
No, John is sitting there like, my God, these two have gotten way too geeky.
It's a transit service. It's going to work or it won't. Come on, you guys. No, you know,
Right.
I look forward to the opportunities here. I just did a quick Google search and I was just trying to bring it all together here. I just searched Dilkin's amalgamation and I was just trying to just pitch what I'm
And he
seeing
got his
here.
PhD thesis.
Yeah.
Well, of course. I mean, that's where it was all going to lead to. And that PhD thesis saying the only way that you can bring about amalgamation is to either force it from top down or from grassroots coming after a shared service level where it can't really be, argued against. And it's astounding to look at where we are right now versus where we were, Melinda, when you were talking about it in the early noughts there at the city. And it didn't look like it was something that could ever happen. And, what a difference, I suppose, 15 years can make and changes of administration. But maybe the way is truly the slow and steady way, and to get the web so linked out intrinsically that it only makes sense at some point later on, that creeping web of amalgamation.
Yeah. So here's the problem with that, in my opinion. And I'm going to, institutions, once they get set up and structures, once they get set up, they tend to linger and they are, devilishly hard to undo, even if everyone can see that they don't work. There's a few good examples. The cannabis regime in Canada, I would say that people have known, there's been a widespread sense that wasn't working for 25 years. And it still endured and endured and endured. There are many other systems that were put together haphazardly or put together to solve the political or social needs of the moment, and not built up strategically, and we're still suffering with them not being optimal. And that's my concern with this approach to regionalism. I think it would be much better, and maybe not as easy, but much better, to come up with structures and systems of shared governance, dispute resolution, an approach that gives the level of democracy and democratic input that we have become accustomed to in this country, that we demand in this country, to make sure that we don't end up with regional systems that don't serve the people who are paying for them. So I have a little bit of concern about that, and this approach, if that's what this represents, John. The Windsor Police in Amherstburg, Transit Windsor in Amherstburg, at some point we have to really talk about, if our services are so intertwined with each other, are we really two legal entities but one community? And if we are, does that make sense?
I don't know. I just, I look forward, Doug, to the public consultation that they'll have for the amalgamation talks. I'm sure that your input will be well heated.
Via Teletown Hall. Press 1 if you think Mayor Dilkins is good looking. Press 2 if you think he's intelligent.
Let's get on to, do we have time for both topics here and for your consideration, or should we just choose which one? We can do a quick vote on the panel.
Just keep rolling, John.
Okay, great. Well, we will move right along then. Windsor Star's Taylor Campbell put this one out. 2 safe consumption sites have been selected for community consultation. I suppose this just rolled right into it. Windsor Essex County Health Unit has identified 2 potential safe drug consumption sites selected for community consultation phase for the city. Neither of the locations are being disclosed. However, the health unit's CEO says both possible sites are in downtown Windsor, and data shows that a significant number of drug overdoses occur there, and that's where the need is most. Great. The CEO, Teresa Marintet, says input from residents and businesses is needed to make sure that the health unit addresses any concerns that they may have. Now, community consultation in this process is the next step to open the consumption and treatment services site, which will also be offering residents a supervised place to use the drugs, as well as services to help treat people with addiction, recovery, counseling, primary medical care, opioid dependency treatment, and other health and social services. The health unit is looking to lease, not purchase this site. This all began in August of last year after a request for expressions of interest However, there were no takers, and as such, the health unit worked with community partners dealing with mental health and addiction to identify proposed sites. Now, these sites have to be approved at the end of the day by the province, by the country, and by the municipality. So it's not to say that there aren't still hurdles to be moved forward. And we know that 61% of respondents to a health unit survey say they support a supervised injection site, many saying that they support it in the core. And the reason, of course, this is so important is due to these opioid overdoses that we're seeing this year. The health unit has issued 7 alerts, which is a record number. There were at least 34 overdose related ER visits recorded between April 5th and May 5th, which is just, it's staggering. It's terrible. 28 of those involved fentanyl, which of course can be very quick. Well, just it's deadly, but it can be, the impacts can be staggering. 16 of the overdoses happened in just 1 week alone. So we'll be finding more information out about these 2 locations moving forward. Melinda, guest panelist, I'm going to just keep coming to you first on these topics. I don't think that you're offside with the need for these. What's your thought, just to set you up right at the outset here? You think that these 2 sites being located in the core makes the most sense? Should they be spread out and then, take it where you want to go?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, if we're thinking about the health unit as a county-wide organization, then I would anticipate that there ought to be one at least in Leamington, and not just both in the downtown core. Now, they maybe have proposed 2 sites with the idea that one of them ultimately gets approved. It's going to be it kind of course, I am on side with it, and I've mentioned before I'm from the West Coast, and so the fact that we don't already have one is already kind of surprising to me, considering that they've been operating in the downtown east side of Vancouver for decades now. And we know they work, for a variety of reasons. They get people into treatment, and they also prevent. At that time, it was about preventing AIDS. I mean, it wasn't really about preventing overdoses. It was about preventing AIDS by allowing people to have clean, kits. So of course I'm on side with it. I'm going to be kind of interested in how the community consultation goes, and how the type of rhetoric or the type of tools that the health unit brings to bear to help people to understand why this is a good thing for the neighborhood and not a bad thing, why it's going to improve the quality of the core and not undermine the quality of the core. And so I was thinking about this earlier this afternoon. I thought, what was higher limits if not a kind of safe consumption site? Because I remember you talking about, I'm sure I've heard you on the show talking about people coming in and then taking too many edibles and having to be kind of managed until they can actually, wander home. And I mean, I know like the most minuscule amount of THC and I'm a complete loopy, I'm hopeless.
Yeah. It's you've set me up for this one, so I'll take it right now. It is, I can say it is frustrating that the same health unit that was the one who inevitably led to my being shut down due to the Smoke-Free Ontario Act and what they said would have been my non-compliance due to medical patients taking their legal medicine. The dichotomy between that health unit not allowing legal patients to take their legal medication to now being the forerunners to open a site for illegal drug users to take illegal drugs. It's a dichotomy that is, the gap between the two it's frustrating to say the least, if only because I wish they would have been as progressive as they're being now at the time when I was being shut down. In no way am I against this whatsoever. I think it's great. We need to be far more progressive. We offered people, we had naloxone on site. We had some of our staff was trained with it. It was a very important thing. That was right when it was being introduced to the community. I took my training myself with it. Having said that, the health unit made their choices. They followed the law. But I do appreciate that you brought up that. Absolutely.
I think the difference, Jon, is that you guys had like brand new top of the line Xboxes and PlayStations. And, my understanding is these sites will have Atari 2600s only.
Maybe that could be the problem. We tried to go retro in some areas, but the customers, they just weren't having it.
I think this is long overdue. It's good that it is continuing to move forward, despite perhaps a little bit of perceived inconsistency there. I'm really glad the health unit is moving this forward. I think, like Melinda, I'm interested to see how the consultations go. And if you're listening, I would encourage you to take part in these consultations. I think there are going to be plenty of voices of legitimate concern from residents and people who have concerns about the site. So if you're in favor of safe injection sites, if you think that they save lives, then you should definitely take part. But I'm really interested to see when this lands on council. I'm really interested to see where the votes are. I'm really interested to see the line that Mayor Dilkens takes. Let me ask you guys this. Do you think that this site passes this council?
It's a tough pass.
I mean, it depends on what, I wonder. I mean, we're talking about much more serious drugs here than cannabis, right? We're talking about injectable drugs. We're talking about fentanyl. We're talking about, drugs that have a certain amount of moral nastiness around them, right? But we had the big argument 2 or 3 years ago about where the first pot shop should go or where the first cannabis retail shop should go. And now they are everywhere. Everywhere. Like where I work now over in Paulette Village, I have to go all the way to Walker Road to find an LCBO or to Lausanne, but there's probably 10 pot shops between where I work and the nearest LCBO. They are everywhere. And so I think, we need to kind of so I wonder if the perception of the dangerousness of things like safe consumption are changing in much the same way as our perception around the dangerousness of cannabis.
I think that, that makes sense. There's so much overblown, the fear of the new, right? And you also, I remember hearing when I first got into the cannabis industry and looking for votes, and I won't say which politician it was, but, asking for an endorsement, or would you come out and do a positive media story, or would you at least defend me against a government that's trying to shut me down? And even though the jobs were there and everything was on side with it, the point was, it came down to, I don't know if I'm going to get a vote for it. I might lose a vote, but I don't necessarily see that I could gain a vote. So if you're just doing that actuarialism of politics, coming out in favor of something, it's not going to necessarily get you any good if you already got your base that's there to reelect you, that you can rely on. You don't want to go offside with them. And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I remember how big a deal Mayor Dilkens specifically made that first cannabis shop being, line of sight, not 500 meters, and it was too close to the school. And then they opened up a cannabis store right next door to the new downtown public library, and there wasn't a peep about it, with a back door that goes into the parking lot. And no complaints from me, of course, whatsoever, except for maybe the perceived hypocrisy of it. But
I had to laugh. I went to that one. Sorry, this is probably not RCP stuff, but I went there one day.
It can be RCP stuff. It should be. No one else wants to.
And so I went there one day, and it was COVID time, and so you couldn't go in. And so this lovely young lady came out with her iPad, and she offered me a hot chocolate. So it was like a hot chocolate while you wait in line to order. And so then she helped me order on my iPad. And there was another old guy with gray hair like mine, and we were sipping our hot chocolate under a nice tent, looking at each other and going, I'm old enough to remember doing this in the back alley. And now I'm drinking hot chocolate on the main street of town.
Yeah. It's a different world. Hey, even for me, I used to play shows with my band at the Loop, and we would literally smoke our joints because we'd get yelled at by the building manager for doing it in the direct area of the fish market building. We would walk to exactly where the entrance to the weed store is now from the alley, and that's where we'd smoke. And now I'm looking to, like, if we ever play downtown again, I mean, it's now Rocket Mortgage or whatever, Rocket Financial. So we're not going to be doing shows there. But if we do, We certainly can't smoke joints out front of the door of the pot shop. That's not allowed. But what a difference. I guess, Doug, I want to bring your voice in on this one as well. Just, I guess, circling to, I want to hear your opinion on how this council thing really will roll out, because it's going to pass the feds. It'll pass the province. It's only the city that's going to say no here. And again, we're getting closer and closer to an election again.
Yeah, and I think that is the concern. If this comes down too close to the municipal election, then it may be more politically difficult for some councillors. I think this is one instance where the ward system might work against what I think is the best policy. If you are a counselor for, and I hate to name any particular ward because I don't want to call any one individual out, but if you're a counselor for a distant East End ward that has a relatively affluent demographics, and although there are, I'm sure, overdoses happening in that ward, they're maybe not publicized, they're not visible. They're not as visible to the public. The idea that there's a problem in my ward is probably not steeped into the minds of residents. So I think you may see resistance from councillors that would surprise you, because they don't see, just as you said, that transactional. I don't see how this is going to help me politically, or if you want to look at it a little bit less cynically, doesn't represent the will of our residents, and it does represent an easy angle for opponents to try to gain some momentum. If the incumbent councillor is coming out in favor of a supervised injection site downtown, that could be something that an opponent tries to wedge them with. So I think it could get dicey. But ultimately, I'm just sort of thinking about this, and I do think that attitudes have changed. I do think there's a recognition that there is, we have a crisis on our hands here. There are a lot of people suffering and dying, and any tools that we can have as a community to try to change the direction on that are tools that we need to have. So I'm hopeful that this would pass, but I think it's going to be a tough one.
It'll help if the police chief comes out in favor.
That's true.
Yeah, definitely. Do you think that that'll happen?
I mean, she has already moved the police, the dial on the police side on the naloxone issue quite substantially in the short time that she's been there. So.
Yeah, I mean, last year, I'm just reading, 64 lives were lost to opioid overdoses in Windsor, Essex. And that's compared with 48 the year prior. I think, anyone here that has studied this issue will understand this analogy, but for anyone else who hasn't, opioid deaths, they've been going up like a hockey stick for the past little while. For the first, you go back, 8-9 years, very, very slow growth, but over the past 4 or 5 years, just what a steep increase. Almost, exactly like COVID. You see the first cases at the outset, and then you realize it's a much bigger issue than it actually is. You start to recognize it and deal with it. Many people are calling this the unaware epidemic that exists, or pandemic rather. It exists everywhere, but we're dealing with it here locally. I hope that it doesn't get mired down in politics. I can't say though I'm overly confident just because of the timelines that are required here. Look at where we're at with the downtown mission. There's obviously politics involved in something like that, and I'm not saying that it's that apples equals oranges situation here, but when you talk about the user base, I think it's going to be really easy for certain people, if they want to paint with a broad stroke, a broad brush, and that's always concerning. And this is a mayor who called cannabis users riffraff and undesirables. And if we're going to be talking about people that are actually taking illegal hard drugs, concerned with where the rhetoric could end up, but I'm going to remain optimistic that everybody here is going to work in the best interests of everyone else, because that's the society I would like to live in.
I like your optimism.
Yeah, I'm going to lose it pretty quick. Any last thoughts on this topic, or should we now we'll move on to for your consideration. Now, Melinda, guest panelist, why don't you start things off with us? For those who are listening and haven't tuned in yet, and it's still a reasonably new segment, for your consideration, we ask our guest panelist and then all panelists on the show to bring forward a topic. We try to keep it political to a certain extent, but it's a fun time where we get to let our hair down a little bit, cut loose. There's so many stories that we don't get a chance to get to that we like to have some fun here. So, Melinda, guest panelist, what is up for our consideration?
Well, I was told it hadn't have to be local, but it could potentially have a local political impact because it has to do with policing. So here's the headline from the Vancouver Sun. Vancouver police apologize after arresting retired judge based on suspect description. Selwyn Romilly, a Black retired Supreme Court judge, said he will not be filing complaint after being arrested on Friday for looking like a suspect being sought. So Vancouver police received a call that downtown on English Bay, there was somebody, a person of dark complexion in their 40s, running around and harassing people and potentially threatening people. And so the 5 police officers ran down to the area, and they arrested an 81-year-old Black man who happened to be down there because they got a report. And he says they got a report that somebody made a report. I fit the description of the person being reported, a 40-year-old person of dark complexion. Without much ado, they had me turn around, put the hands behind my back, put me in handcuffs. They didn't ask my name or any questions. They put the handcuffs on in indecent haste. Selwyn Romilly was appointed as a judge in 1974, and his brother, Valmon Romilly, sued the Vancouver police in 1974 for being arrested unlawfully, also because he happened to be a Black guy in the wrong place. So the Vancouver police chief has said that it is offensive to say that the Vancouver police have systemic racism, but the mayor of Vancouver has said all of our colonial institutions have systemic racism and we need to apologize.
Just what a shit show of a story.
What a shit show.
The tie-in that of the year that he was appointed as a judge, his brother was arrested for the very thing that in 2021 he was arrested. I mean, bookends are always really great to a story, but not when it's about systemic racism. I mean, it helps to establish the narrative, though. But wow, just awful all around. Thank you for that, though, Melinda. I mean, we all do have to recognize what exists around us, and it's hard to say that that's not systemic racism. Now, Doug, I know you've brought something forward here. I'm looking at the notes, and I can only presume, based off of the first glance that I have, you've brought forward something about Dungeons and Dragons.
No, Alex was tweeting about Dungeons and Dragons yesterday, and I did engage him on that because he had some great ideas. But no, this is an Alex Denonville tweet. So Alex Denonville is a communications officer for the town of Essex. He also was a past Ward 6 candidate. And he is engaging in a little tiny bit of Twitter activism. His Twitter handle is @Denonville. So you should check it out. And the tweet reads, pre-election campaign contribution publication would be an easy win for 2022 municipal elections. Good info for local media outlets who often publish top campaign contributors after an election. Relevant data should be provided so voters can make an informed choice. And, I think that's a really interesting topic, and maybe it's something that we can expand on in a future show. Maybe Alex would like to come and chat with us about that. It's really interesting to me. I think it's a great idea. I would love to see donations disclosed in real time. However, having worked on municipal campaigns, my share of them, I've got to say that is asking a lot, considering the logistics of a typical municipal campaign. The idea that a ramshackle campaign run by some hopeful for a ward council seat is going to be able to track and disclose donations in real time might be a bit more than is reasonable, but I think it's a good aspirational goal, and maybe we should think about it at least for mayor's races.
I like how you, I know I'm not supposed to respond, but I like how you set that up that, yeah, it'd be difficult for the candidates themselves in real time during an election campaign. But I don't know, I feel like you're really omitting the fact that which local media outlet that takes advertising dollars is going to like publish who their donors were. It's like, no, I did not give you money to go and out me to the public. Don't allow it. It would also require a bit more digging than a lot of local media outlets do. I'm not naming names. I'm just speaking loudly. Though that it's a frustrating bit still. For your consideration, Canada to the moon. Our science minister, Francois Philippe Champagne, says that we plan to land a rover on the moon in the next 5 years. Canadian Space Agency says this unmanned robotic vehicle will aim to get imagery and measurements from the moon's surface. We're doing this in partnership with NASA. We're hoping that it will be able to run through an entire lunar night, 2 weeks on the dark side of the moon. Pretty cool. My favorite part, all I really want to say about this is this was announced. They said, well, the announcement came in conjunction with the first lunar eclipse that we've had since 2019. No, that was planned. This is a government by symbols. They understand how important it is to jive the media cycle as well. I also think it's kind of funny, the United States goes to Mars and we announce in 5 years, we'll get to the moon. We're doing our best. We're Canada.
It's pretty good, man.
It was a nice story.
There's still work to be done on the moon.
I'm not doubting it.
This is like if the state of Rhode Island said we're going to the moon, that would be a big deal. This is a big deal, man.
Doug Sartori.
We always forget. Like we want to go for like, let's go to Pluto, but like there's still work to be done. Like there's still work to be done, on the moon. Let's, if the Americans have abandoned it, fine, let's take it. Let's do it. Let's get Automate Canada and the Canadian Association of Mold Makers in on building that moon rover.
Well, let's build a moon base. Ever since I watched Space 1999 as a young lad, I have been waiting for, an awesome
opportunity
moon
to build
base.
it out of styrofoam and foam core.
Well, I will just say if Rhode Island with their 1 million population decides to go to the moon, I'll be a little more excited, I guess, than this one. Maybe 30 times more excited. Regardless, I've had fun with this show, you guys. Did you guys?
Yeah,
both of you.
Thank you so much.
It's always nice when we get a guest panelist on, but more than that, it's always nice when Don's not here. It's just a little bit of a relief. Joking.
Well,
Don
doesn't listen to the show, so it's okay. Vent away.
He'll never know. It's perfect. I mean, well, thank you so much for joining us tonight, Melinda. It means the world to us. Talked about some good topics there, really dove into what they actually meant. I keep looking at your background right now with Brampton, and as much fun as we have, as much laughing as we're having, you look to communities like Brampton, you look to communities like Peel that are in a much worse off way than we are. And it's great that we're able to make light of situations from our perspective here down the 401, but it's still very much life or death for people. And I would only hope that the rollout of vaccine continues to be on, the most equitable basis that it can be. So thank you for your perspectives tonight, Melinda. It means the world to us. Rose City politics wise, Doug, great to share a panel with you. Always fun. We don't get these back and forths with just the two of us that often.
No, it's true. When you said that, it's good to share the panel. It got me thinking how lovely it's going to be when we're all fully vaccinated and we can have a drink after the show.
I can't wait. I said it before. I joined the show and we did 2 friggin' episodes and went into lockdown.
To be fair,
I was on one of those episodes.
Yeah. To be fair, John, I think that you actually still now have attended more Rose City politics after parties than you have been on episodes. So,
that's fair.
You've gotten your share.
That's fair. Well, this is a show. We did it. It's the 26th of May. We're so happy to get through these. Join us next week where we will be talking and analyzing the most pressing issues in the news. It might just be the same issues again. We might be talking about Mayor Dilkins and the vaccines. Chris Vanderdolen might say something again that's stupid, and we might have to talk about that. Who knows? It's really up to all of you. Let us know what you want to hear, and prod your local leaders to go say some stupid stuff, and then we'll talk about that as well. You can influence what we discuss. If you're listening tonight and you're a Patreon subscriber, thank you so much. If you're not, head to patreon.com/Rose City Politics. We are in print monthly, BizX Magazine. We're also online at bizxmagazine.com. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and all of your favorite podcasting apps. And we broadcast live on tape every week, and it is because of the very kind support of Liuna 625, building better communities. This is Rose City Politics, and we will see all of you next week on the podcast. Thanks for joining us.